Good morning, eighth graders. So we are focusing in on land pollution. And when we're talking land pollution, we are talking a little bit about deforestation, mineral mining, oil drilling, and then finally like our landfill usage, because obviously a majority of our pollution is our own garbage. So what would a like good landfill look like versus what it's been in the past? So we are still covering 3-3 and 3-4, and basically by the end of today, we should have a better understanding of deforestation, mining and drilling, as well as proper landfill usage. So make sure this is in front of you and we will get going. So we talked back in minerals and rocks about how all of our minerals are here on Earth, and those are the only ones we're ever going to have. They are non-renewable resources. And the way that we get at these minerals is through a process called extraction. Now, this can either be through mining or through drilling. So mining is typically what we do when we're looking for more of those solid sorts of minerals, our golds, silvers, things like that. Um, there are quite a few different ways to mine, but essentially the whole concept behind mining is you are digging in the ground, scraping away layer after layer of rock and other sediment to eventually expose the buried resources. So in the next slide, we'll talk about a couple of ways that we can do that. And then drilling is where we are forcing pipes because we're trying to extract that gas or liquid sort of mineral. Typically, this is like our fossil fuels, our natural gases, things like that. But this is to extract the liquid or gaseous fossil fuels, forcing the fuels up to the surface. Placing them under pressure allows for the fluid to rise, and then gases obviously just want to rise as is. So those are the two different ways of extraction, but they can both be done in very different ways. So let's talk about mining. So surface mining can be done in multiple ways. There are open pits, there are surface mining, strip mining, mountaintop removal, things like that. There are so many different ways, but the idea is just like with this photo, that you start at the top and you just slowly take layer by layer away. You can see, especially over here, how it's layer after layer. That is how they got down there. Now, granted, you get some disruption because probably some sort of rock slide, things like that, but you then have trucks and equipment and things like that that are able to get down toward where the actual ore is. Or remember, is like the mineral within a rock or sediment still. So, those are the sorts of surface mining. Now, strip mining and the removal of the mountaintops seems, say seems very loosely, the least harmful because you can like slowly move things away. You're not like necessarily disrupting an entire ecosystem in a very quick moment, but you really are. So you get some short-term effects. So after you start strip mining, you get some short-term effects such as excess rock and soil causing streams to diverge. So as we discussed with this, probably like this landslide eating away at what were layers, if you imagine that on the other side and it's falling into a stream or into a river, things like that, it is then moving the water away. Excuse me. Excuse me. It's moving the water away from where it was originally intended, meaning that you are completely disrupting a waterway either to humans or to other organisms. you are also completely altering an ecosystem. So, where these people are mining currently was once a habitat for some sort of plant or animal or both. I mean, I'm assuming you're in the mountains, you're going to have some sort of wolf or bobcat sort of situation going on. Pine trees that it's already hard enough to establish up in the mountains, and things like that. You are disrupting that entire. Oh my goodness. Oh, I apologize. You are disrupting that entire ecosystem. So now all of this is just within the moment of actual mining. Now, when the mining is complete, the ore has been removed, you then start to see those long-term effects take place. Okay, you've stripped out these minerals and these ores and possibly other nutrients, leaving what rock behind or what soil behind very poor and not able to really support the native organisms that were once there. Um, so it would be like taking clayous North Dakota soil and transplanting it over in Minnesota where it's very sandy and loose, to where you can't support the same sort of trees and grasses and things like that, because in Minnesota, those native plants are used to the very loose soil that's very moist and a little bit more malleable, versus our clayous soil is very stiff, and yes, it has some moisture, but it's really hard to extract the moisture out, and things like that. So you're leaving behind poor, infertile soil into this area. On top of that, you're now like burying a new valley that had been created, because let's face it, mining doesn't happen overnight. It is a long-term sort of process, to where now you're burying this new valley and this new water system that has been kind of figuring itself out, to where it's like, well, where does the water go now? Um, so you have all of those on top of, like, as you are moving and transporting, you're adding more carbon emissions into the atmosphere thanks to these trucks and tractors. You are possibly, like, we can't travel down a road in the fall without seeing some sort of remnants of sugar beet on the side of the road, to where, imagine instead of sugar beets, you have different ores of different minerals that are not native to that area, to where then you are essentially introducing a toxin into a new area, and things like that. Um, like I said at the beginning of this seems like a very non-invasive sort of tactic, because you can move little bits by little bits instead of just like, oh, I'm gonna blow this side up sort of a thing. But it is actually one of the most invasive forms of mining. It causes a great environmental disturbance. So on top of the organisms that live within that little space that you're like digging up and moving, you now add new sound pollutions and actual environmental pollutions and things like that to the neighboring ecosystems and communities and things like that. So surface mining can do a lot of harm, without you even really thinking about it. So next, this is a video. It is super duper quick. It explains what deforestation is and our natural role within it. Excuse me. And then it even goes as far as to start introducing some of the things that you can do to reverse the effects, and things like that. So I'm going to let you watch that one independently, and then we'll come back together. It is like less than 3 minutes, I believe. This last one is a time lapse of what it looked like thanks to Google Earth. What our planet used to look like back in like the 1980s, to very early 2000s. This was something that it is on the older side now, especially when we're thinking like, or sorry, not early 2000s, early 2020s. When you think 5 years later, like where are we truly at? This is impactful. So as you can see, even just by this little screenshot, the difference between this forest in 1984 versus what it looks like today or what it looked like during 2020. So this one you need to have your sound on because you start to notice the different noise pollutions that are starting to occur as well. And I know we don't talk about noise pollutions as an actual like topic in this unit, but there is something to be said about how new sounds introduced to an environment can affect those within it. I think of the difference between my house during the winter when there's no tractors and other vehicles speeding down 76th and things like that versus what it sounds like now with those cars that are buzzing down the road and the tractors getting the fields ready for a spring planting and things like that. Yeah, so anyway, I digress. I apologize. So this is our forest time lapse. Again, you'll want to watch this, possibly come back, depending on whether you were continuing with independent notes or moving on to a different form. So hopefully those little tidbits start to introduce you to the world of mining as well as deforestation and everything else that's kind of happening within that. If you are hanging out with me for the rest of independent notes, fabulous. Hold on a moment. If you are moving on to a different type of notes, enjoy and let me know if you have any questions. Oh my goodness, I need to stop yawning. So, we talked about surface mining. And what we also need to talk about is underground mining. So underground mining has changed dramatically over the decades that we've been doing this. So underground mining is still being done. It just looks a little bit different. We used to have the men in the coveralls go down into this pit, very similar to what the photo is showing, and using canaries to identify whether there is or is not enough oxygen for humans to be able to sustain life. But coal mining is still happening. People are still going into our earth to extract coal. And back between 2010 and 2013, there were still 77 fatalities. So 77 unalivements of coal miners. Not to mention the over 10,000 former miners who unalived between 1990 and 2000. Between 10 years, we lost 10,000 people due to primarily black lung disease or pneumoconiosis, something like that. I know it's pneumo and cis at the end. I don't know how the middle goes together. But essentially, it is your lungs become so filled with all that dust and debris and whatnot that they turn black without you needing to be a smoker. And it puts a lot of stress on your lungs, and then it puts a lot of stress on your heart to where they just can't do what they need to do, and all that. So those are like the human issues, but not to mention underground mining is a significant cost. The equipment itself is super duper expensive, not to mention meeting codes and ensuring the safety of your miners. Excuse me. So ensuring the safety of your miners, making sure that you don't have a tunnel that's going to collapse, and things like that. It is less disturbing, less, very loose, to the natural environment, because essentially you're just creating this one massive hole, and you're not like taking anything else from around it. Things like that, versus with strip mining, you are taking away acres and acres and acres of soil and things like that. So less environmental hazard, still not great. Plus, then, if you do suffer from a collapse or a subsidy, leading to affecting our water flows and things like that, like you're still moving Earth. And what's a little bit scarier is you're moving Earth beneath Earth. So if you think of going to the beach and you build a sandcastle, but you want to like dig a little hole like through it, because I don't know, that's what Will loves doing in his sandbox right now, is digging little like tracks that his trucks can go under these bridges and all this or whatever. Imagine doing that under thousands of pounds of actual earth and not ensuring that you have the proper like engineering to make sure it's safe. Oh my. Things like that. But then you do have underground aquifers and other sorts of water movement, and you're potentially polluting that or diverging that, and it's all its own thing, and some things are happening without humans even being able to lay an eye on it, because it's somewhere underneath the earth that you have disturbed and just don't realize it. So underground mining, yes, less direct impact on the ecosystem above, but still has an impact and very, very costly. Oil or gas drilling is the final way to extract minerals or resources from our earth. So the biggest issue with this, yes, as you can see from these pictures, like this oil platform is out in the middle of the ocean. You may have disturbed where these pylons have gone in to the actual ocean floor and all of that, but it's significantly smaller of a disruption than any other sorts of mining. Even with these oil drillers, like, yes, you want them to be kind of on a maintained road so that you're able to have access to them, but they themselves do not take up much of the environment to where the ecosystem is able to still kind of do what it needs to do around it. But granted, you think of adding in noise pollution and things like that. The issue with drilling is it carries a very high risk of pollution. Like, I imagine, and I guess I've never been on a drilling team, but like if you imagine the movies where they're drilling for oil, they're like digging down in with these pipes, and then you get this burst of oil shooting up and spraying all over. And they continue to do this until they believe their pipe is long enough and into the actual reservoir, versus just the little bits that you hit along the way. So there's that when you're actually just preparing the site. But then you think about, oh my goodness, what is that movie? But there's a movie where an oil rig out in the middle of the ocean essentially like fails, and then you have these fires, you have not so awesome things entering into our oceans, plus the oil itself coming out and spilling into our oceans. I mean, we see the Dawn dish soap commercials, things like that. Not to mention just the power to actually extract the like oil or gas is adding to the CO2 emissions. If you thought that underground mining was expensive, it is nothing compared to drilling and oil and gas drilling. Super, super significant risk and like cost that goes with it. Not to mention everybody who works on that has to be so highly trained because it is such a like significant process. So that it is not safe in the least bit to work on an oil rig or drilling out in the middle of western North Dakota or whatnot, because of typically where you are drilling, it's very isolated. And if something goes wrong, it goes wrong. You're working with flammable gases and oils and things like that. So it's a very significant risk to those who work within this field. The last thing I want to touch on when it comes to like drilling is hydraulic fracturing, or we lovingly refer to it as fracking up here. So the idea of fracking is you are drilling into the surface and then you make a really quick like right angle turn, and you start going across, and then you send sound waves into the rock, disturbing it, kind of shaking it and breaking it into smaller pieces, allowing for the oil to come out of the little nooks and crannies. Fracking is one of the last steps because typically you are drilling down into a reservoir of oil, and you then are like just sucking out like you would like with a straw. But this is where you go down, you make that right angle turn, and now you're trying to get those little bits of stuff in between all of the rocks. This can lead to very significant environmental hazards, making grounds unsteady, not able to handle like cars and things like that driving on top of it. You are disturbing underground habitats and things like that. And not even just habitats, but just the structure of our Earth. It's meant to be solid, not rocky, and things like that. So those are some of the bigger risks. So we've talked a lot about drilling and its effect on like our ecosystems and things like that. But let's talk about mining and the effects on humans because of mining. So we see an increase in mudslides and landslides and flash floods within mining areas. The mudslides, essentially when you have all that loose gravel and whatnot just kind of sitting off to the side, whether it's waiting to be put back into the surface mine, whether it is what was moved out of the way for the underground mining, either way, you have all this loose rock and soil and things like that, and then you add a rainfall. It just makes it soup. As you can see from the top picture, you just get this goopy mess of loose soil and water. And you can see it's completely blocking a roadway. You wouldn't want to go through any of that because you don't know what other things are in there that could puncture a tire. We learned in our flooding catastrophic event unit that it only takes a couple inches to knock a human over and just a foot or so to be able to move a vehicle out of the way. So mudslides. Now landslides is all of that without the water. So landslides is like this bottom picture where you're removing enough of the supports within our soil and our surface and things like that to where it's easily washed away, whether that's through wind erosion or water erosion, things like that, to where it does not become safe for us because roadways completely just disappear as you're driving over them. Things like that. And then finally, in the middle, you have flash floods. When you are removing vegetation and other diverting waterways and things like that, you are essentially adding the possibility of more moisture, such as rain, into areas that used to maybe be able to support them or were never intended to support that much like water anyway, to where you get flash floods because you have like grasses and trees and things like that that used to absorb all that extra water now trying to collect together, because that's what water does, as we've learned in our water cycle unit. It wants to collect together, and typically when it's collecting in non or in human-based areas. So that's what's happening in the center. Now, finally, the actual physical damage that mining can have on people. The pollutants of our drinking water is the most significant. Our atmosphere as well, which leads to lung disease, cardiovascular disease. But when you're polluting our drinking water, you then also start adding in the possibility of kidney disease, diabetes, hypertension, things like that. You are adding harmful toxins into your body that our bodies were never meant to ingest, to where you start seeing a lot of physical discomfort. So that is the effects that mining can have on the human body. So kind of moving away from mining, but deforestation is one of the effects of mining, especially surface mining. But what is deforestation? So overall, deforestation is the permanent removal of trees to make room for something besides a forest. Now, deforestation can be both natural and unnatural. Okay, we need to understand that first. Okay, but it is the clearing of trees for something that is not a forest. So first of all, we have agriculture, animal grazing, timber, fuel, construction, and manufacturing. Construction, we're talking about the resources for construction, manufacturing, like putting up manufacturing plants, things like that. Forests cover so little of our Earth's surface that we don't need to compromise it that much more by essentially getting rid of what we do have. So I should have, instead of saying natural versus unnatural, I should have said direct versus indirect. So causes of deforestation that are direct causes would be things like natural causes, hurricanes, tornadoes, things like that. Fires, some wildfires, remember, from our catastrophic event unit, are naturally occurring. Dry brush, strike of a lightning, things like that. You have parasites. Okay, invasive bugs are just bugs in general that swarm through and take down an entire forest, as well as flooding. Okay, now granted, all of these causes can be increased because of human activity. Okay, so our indirect or human caused variables include agricultural expansion. As we gain more people on this planet, we need more places to grow food. Cattle breeding. Cattle takes up the most amount of space and the most water and all this or whatever. It's just bleh. That timber extraction, so needing the actual wood for like supporting our growth. Mining, oil extraction, dam construction. You cut off waterways to a forest. What do you think is going to happen? And then finally, infrastructure development. I am just as guilty of this. West Fargo is kind of as a whole. We are not necessarily taking down forests because it's North Dakota, but we're taking away farmland and fertile land to expand where people can actually move and live. So those are the direct So more of the natural causes versus indirect, which are just human causes. Now, deforestation can have a huge impact on the environment as a whole. So because of deforestation, we can start to see more increases in greenhouse gases, which then lead to more significant climate change. We see desertification, essentially you're taking what was once a very moist, fertile area and turning it into some sort of a desert. Now, I'm not saying necessarily the sand and heat and camels, but more so just taking away the moisture and whatnot to support more of those native sort of plants. You see soil erosion. This is huge in this area. Oddly enough, you see fewer crops. It's like we're moving away all of this forest to like expand our farmlands and things like that. You see an increase in flooding, and you see an increase in wildlife relocation. So we'll kind of go through each of these a little bit more in depth as we progress through. So climate change, oh, excuse me. Climate change and increase in greenhouse gases. Obviously, we are taking away the one thing naturally on this planet that takes all of our nasty greenhouse gases and turns it into something productive for us humans. Weird. So no trees to absorb the excess carbon dioxide. On top of taking away the trees, we now leave reflective, like, our leaves essentially reflect a lot of that extra UV back out into the abyss, out into our atmosphere, and then hopefully out into space. So without leaves, we don't have that reflective sort of component to our surface, but rather leaving that dark soil, it is absorbing more of that heat. Okay, in the summer, we tend to wear a lot of like lighter, light colored clothes. That is because we are exposed to more UV during the summer because we're tilted toward the sun, to where when I go stand outside today, because it's projected to be about 82, my torso is going to feel a lot warmer because I'm wearing black versus if I would have worn, say, my light pink one dress or things like that. Like, black and dark colors just absorb more of that heat, versus lighter colors reflect it away. So taking away the leaves that reflect, you're leaving just this dark soil, which is going to absorb. So it's also kind of like the idea of having a clean pile of snow, clean white, no one's ever touched it pile of snow versus a dirty, grungy, dirty pile of snow. The dirty, grungy one tends to melt away much, much faster than the clean white because the white is reflecting more of that radiant energy back versus absorbing it through the dirt. So that's how we start seeing significant climate change. Desertification and soil erosion, they kind of sort of go hand in hand. So this is the process in which fertile land becomes a desert, to where it starts to experience more drought and inappropriate agriculture and things like that, to where it just becomes soil that doesn't want to support any sort of vegetation. With the removal of trees and root systems, what was once solid soil that can retain moisture and things like that now becomes very, very loose, which then allows for our significant wind to pick it up and move it across the street. Like, I believe I explained this in our rock cycle unit, but we have a farm right behind us. This past winter, especially because of how little snow we got and how much wind we had, half of their topsoil, I feel, ended up in my front yard. And my front yard's over here. The farm is on the other side of the house. So the wind picks it up and moves it. So you have wind erosion, as well as, not to mention it, and this is what's happening in this photo, you get all these little gullies essentially, And that's because you have water that will run through there when there is some water and run away, taking the soil with it, depositing it somewhere else, continuing a rock cycle, all that kind of stuff. But it washes it away. You'll notice it in some of our farmland, where all of a sudden you get just this like big black sort of like valley in the middle of a luscious green like field. And that's because the soil isn't able to absorb that moisture, but rather it moves it along. So that's what's going on there. It washes away what is good, fertile soil to be able to support agriculture and whatnot, and moves it somewhere else, and not usually to a place where it needs it. Fewer crops, like I said, weird. We clear all this space essentially just to have more farmland. But fewer trees do mean less water in the atmosphere. Transpiration is a real deal. That's why we talked about it during our water cycle. Taking away those trees again creates like drier soil, which means that it is exposed to harsher sunlight, to where we're not necessarily growing the necessary crops to support our livestock, which then in turn means that we're taking the food that would be put on the grocery shelves for us and feeding it to our livestock so that we hopefully get decent livestock supplies and things like that. It's a whole vicious cycle. Flooding. So because of the root systems being taken away, this picture I feel kind of shows it well. Let me find the color. So as it rains down, okay, these trees are absorbing the excess water, and to the point where, yeah, eventually some of it ends up in a stream, which is what it's supposed to do. But if you look here and now all of a sudden you don't have all of the, I don't know why my thing is glitching. You don't have all these roots that will take it in to where all the water is just flooding down. You now increase the amount of water within these rivers. So this used to be a cute little stream, like it did what it needed to do, itty bitty. This is now gigantic and really starting to eat away at everything around it. So flooding becomes more of an issue. This is where we may be experiencing this a little bit more so around the Red River because we've taken away a lot of those trees around it in order to put up homes and things like that. So that is what's at. Plus then you start adding in this sediment load. So more of this soil comes down here to where you're actually raising the river a little bit. It's so weird. Okay, but flooding. Finally, wildlife relocation. And we've started seeing this more often, even here within the city of West Fargo. So essentially, we are building where animals used to live. I apparently built on the largest vole city in the entire United States, to where now I have little field mice scurrying around all over the place, eating away my yard in winter. Things like that. So we built where they live. We essentially just evicted them, saying, figure it out, and we took over. So we have noticed that more and more wildlife sightings are starting to happen. So this top picture was just from about a month and a half ago. On March 26th, 2025, I even remember getting this text message saying, please be cautious, don't go near this specific park because there has been a bobcat sighting. So I mean, obviously it's a little bit far for us to be able to go to that park. So, but there's a bobcat just roaming around North Horace. And when I say North Horace, I want to say it is a park over in the new Deer Creek development. So tons of houses. Bobcat just walking around, hanging out. I remember back during shutdown, And this was a little scary because we had a very nice spring that year. I remember, to where we would go for walks, and we used to live up by Rendezvous Park, which is, if you know where Aurora Elementary is, it's the park behind that. But March 21st, we have this beautiful little mountain lion, just hanging out in the trees behind an apartment, like garage stalls, things like that. So we are starting to see more and more of the wildlife starting to come into what we would deem as city limits, when really they're just trying to find a place to be safe. We have coyotes, we have fox, things like that. We have deer population. The jackrabbit population is ridiculous out here, but we see all that, but we don't necessarily think about things that maybe would put us on the dinner menu. Um, but yeah, so we essentially come in, we tear down these forests, we take this farmland, and now it becomes our land, and we just expect the animals to hop on board and just peace. I'm gonna go up north to Canada or whatever and just like be. So that's what's going on with that. So that's kind of deforestation in a nutshell. I feel like I've been talking forever, but um, that's that. We have one more little topic we need to talk about before the end of these notes, and that is landfill usage. So, what is a landfill? Well, we know a landfill as a dump site, a garbage center, things like that. And that's essentially all it was until a few decades ago. Um, so, in the in the late 80s, early 90s, we started noticing that our landfills were really starting to take a toll on our natural environment. Um, so with better understanding of the sciences behind landfills, um, legislation was able to create better regulations, um, in order to identify where and how should we dispose of um, our waste. So we then started going through and identifying that location is huge. Okay. There are so many different checks and balances that have to be considered before placing a landfill. Like, landfills cannot be built in an environmentally sensitive area, or like things like that, meaning that you're not going to place it where the only population of this specific bird is currently using as part of their migration patterns, things like that. It needs to be put in a place where groundwater is not really a concern, or if it is, it's easily monitored, things like that. So there are huge, it's called the Resources Conservation and Recovery Act, or RCRA, that puts all these guidelines into place to make sure that landfills, or where we throw our trash, is truly the best place in our environment to throw trash. Okay. So, landfill pollutions. First of all, we have to understand that there are different types of landfills. I didn't know this until I started researching for this little unit. So we have municipal solid waste landfills, which is essentially what we would use on a daily basis. So the landfill up in Fargo and all of that, that is a municipal solid waste land. Now, what makes it municipal is essentially you can put household garbages, nothing weird sort of a thing, within these landfills. There's also bioreactor landfills, which are like a subsidy of municipal, and essentially the only difference is you are adding liquid bacteria to the solid waste to help the breakdown process go a little bit quicker. So municipal and bioreactors are very, very similar. All of that. Then you have industrial waste landfills, which is where like toxic substances are able to go, things that don't break down as easily, such as construction or demolition debris, things like that. Coal combustion residual landfills has like some incinerator sort of regulations that go with that. And then finally, hazardous waste. This is where a lot of like hospitals and places such as that would dispose of their trash. Now, as we have kind of seen back in the old days, essentially how they would create a landfill is they would just dig a giant hole, throw everything in it, and hope for the best. Okay, now the issue that came with this is anything could kind of be thrown in there, and then eventually when it did break down, all of the oopy goopy disgustingness, think of the bottom of your giant trash barrel in your garage. When all that oopy goopy nonsense starts to develop, it just leaches through the soil and into an aquifer or groundwater way or things like that, to where it's really, really gross, to say the least. Versus modern day landfills, and I didn't do any research into this yet, but I plan on looking into it, and hopefully I can tell you in class when you're watching this. Nowadays, landfills are put together with care, and I'm pretty sure this is how the Fargo landfill works, but again, I'm going to do some research into it. So essentially what happens is, yes, you still have kind of a giant pit, but they put down multiple layers of barriers and like monitoring systems in that process. So first goes down a layer of clay, okay? Because as we know, clay is not super absorbent, to where it kind of holds water at a surface. Then they put what is called like a biomesh, or plastic lining around or within that. This then stops any of the leaching from like that nastiness, that goopy nastiness, to go down into the soil, but rather to rest at the lowest point of this hole. Okay, then usually some sediment and whatnot just to kind of give it more space. They put in these pipes to collect the leachate, I believe is what they called it, or that goopy nonsense. They collect it and they turn it into energy. But essentially they just allow it to not sit and become hazardous to everyone else. So that. Then they put in the garbage, and then typically at the end of the day, they cover it up, whether it is with a layer of soil, whether it's with a tarp, things like that. So day after day after day, you get the day's garbage and then a layering. The next day's garbage and then a layering. Next day's garbage and layering, all the way up. And they're compressing this down as they go with these giant tractors and whatnot until they have deemed the landfill to be at capacity. Once that has happened, they put down more clay, they put down another plastic layer, and then quite a few feet worth of soil, in order to support potential growth of grasses and things like that. In the meanwhile, while all of this was happening, they had groundwater monitoring systems going on all around them. They've added in pipes that are going to collect and help people monitor the methane output, and all of that. It's such a process now, but hopefully this is all being done because this is what's the best for our environment. In the video notes, waste management, so the green and yellow cans and things like that, they explained that they then go and they monitor this dead landfill for 30 plus years to make sure that groundwater is still not being affected, that methane releases have like deplenished to the point of safe like levels and things like that. It is unreal the amount of energy that now goes into our landfills. Now, the reason why we put so much time and energy into these landfills now is because of all of the environmental impacts they have, by just piling up all of our garbage into one hole. So we monitor and we have landfill protocols because landfills give off methane gas, or as Mr. G loves to jokingly call it, it's cow farts, okay, which is a significant greenhouse gas. They release excess carbon dioxide, excess water vapor, trace amounts of oxygen, quite a bit of nitrogen, hydrogen, and then non-methane organic compounds. Now, all of this is kind of okay independently, but at the amounts that they're releasing and combined together, it just screams smog and acid rain and ozone, tropospheric ozone, and all of this. It just screams climate change. Okay? So it's important that we monitor these things so that we don't have those same sort of issues occurring in our new, hopefully better developed landfills. Oh my goodness. Landfills are also detrimental because it destroys natural habitat. Okay, the only things that really want to live in a landfill are seagulls, because seagulls are gross. But if you just start piling garbage somewhere, whatever organisms originally lived there before you started piling the garbage don't want to be there anymore. So that you're destroying the natural habitats, you are taking away grasslands and trees and this, that, and the other. And then finally, probably the most dangerous is the leachate. This is that bio-gunk that is created after everything else has started to break down. Now, you have all this leachate on about 600 acres. That's about as big as a landfill tends to get. And all of this, and it starts to go into our soil. Now, leachate is really scary because it contains a very high level of ammonia, which is a cleaning agent, but it's also not good. So it starts to deplenish oxygen levels and then decrease plant life and growth and things like that, to where you essentially start to create this dead zone. Okay, if you think we use ammonia to clean up bacteria and things like that in our households, imagine what it's doing to the environment around us and how it is impacting the plant life and all that sort of stuff. So leachate can also contain mercury, which we know is highly poisonous and dangerous to humans, to where if that leaches into our groundwater and we start ingesting mercury, it does not end well. So landfill regulations are really necessary in order to prevent this. So I talked a really long time because there was a lot to process in this whole thing. If you have any questions, reach out to your teachers. We're here to help. I know I threw a lot of info at you, but I think it's important for us to focus on this stuff to see what are we doing to our environment. So, awesome. Thank you so much, 8th graders. If you have any questions, let us know. If not, have an awesome rest of your day. Thank you.